In our set of downloadable examples of design patterns, there is an object pool example, and this is the script right here. This is the script for the sequence diagram, and I'll just use a picture here to show you the example of reusable pool. So the main app program right here is basically our client example. So let's take a look at what's happening here. So the first thing that happens is that we in this client demonstration we create a reusable pool, but in itself reusable pool is implemented as a singleton. So let's take a look at its design. Reusable pool, right? So you should be able to recognize that it has constructor which is protected, which is the same as private, but it will be accessible in derived classes. But here reusable pool is not accessible. The constructor is not accessible outside of this class except in derived classes. So here the recognizable method should be get instance. Again, the same idea. We enter critical sections and we exit critical section and we return the instance of our reusable pool, which in itself is a singleton design pattern, right? So you can see very recognizable pattern. We have reusable pool as singleton, lock, acquire, release, lock, and mutex. So we create reusable pool instance. Then in our main program, what we do is that now we want to be able to create reusable visitors, right? Something that we were discussing earlier, that in our case simulation scenario, the thinking was that the simulation scenario could be using reusable visitors as opposed to creating brand new ones all the time. So here in this sample, reusable pool would represent this object right here, this simulation scenario, right? It would be the class that would represent reusable pool. So this is reusable pool, which is in our case like a simulation scenario class. So then we would like to be able to define some default pool size right here. Okay, so the pool defines the default pool size if we want to. So default pool size is set to 10. Okay, so it's just some kind of default number of objects that we want to create right away. So we go ahead and we create visitors, but we create visitors not by using the new operator anymore. Instead, we acquire visitor. So visitor, acquire visitor, again, it uses the critical section protection, again, reusing the mutex object to protect this as critical section, get the maximum pool size, and basically set reusable visitor to in use. Okay, so if we want to maintain this type of design pattern, we need to provide set in use. Okay, so let's take a look at this reusable visitor right here, reusable visitor. So it says the Boolean indicator true or false whether it's in use. So by default, of course, it's set to false, and in use there is a method that returns the current status, and set in use will be basically resetting it to false or true. So that's the idea that we need to maintain. We need to provide these two methods to make our visitors reusable. So these two methods, set in use, is in use, or set in use right here would go to the visitor. Right, so here we would have to add these is in use and set in use. Okay, so I'll just try to make these a little bit more readable by adding spaces in the names of my operations. So is in use just returns a Boolean result, and set in use takes a Boolean result to set new value. Okay, so this is our current design right here. Okay, so to make visitor reusable, we need to implement these two operations. All right, so back to our sample, and then again, anytime we need to get access to the visitor inside of our client program here in the main operation, we say acquire visitor. Okay, and so this loop right here demonstrates that we acquire a bunch of visitors, and then basically we repeat this loop. Okay, and if we essentially add another loop which would release the visitor, then we should be able to see that we acquire the same visitors if we are running this sample. So if you are curious about this specific example of reusable pool, then you can basically compile and run this Java application and take a look and play with the code. So this is here in a set of downloadable design pattern examples that we have part of our handout. So just I'd like to go over all of these summary points that reusable pool basically refers to the objects contained in the pool as subjects of the pool. So it's a typical terminology. And generally the pool may be a growing pool. So of course, if we go back to our design here, it's really up to the simulation scenario to create more visitors. Perhaps we may want to grow the number of visitors in the building, and we can stick to a certain number, or we can make it a growing pool. So the pool can also be empty at the beginning and then be pre-populated with a number of objects. So for instance, we can start our simulation scenario even before the user decides to click the play button. We may already load parameters for the simulation scenario and realize that we need 500 visitors for the simulation scenario. So we can start creation of these visitors even before the user clicks execute or run the scenario option on their user interface. So pool can create new subjects, and pool may also try to restrict the creation of subjects to a certain number. So then what it means is that the only way to get new objects, to get access to our reusable visitors example in this specific handout, right? We need to say acquire visitor, and if we decide that we no longer want this visitor, we can say release visitor. So these are the two main ways to maintain the idea of the pool. So reusable pool design implements a facility to periodically clean up the unused objects. For example, we can combine it with measuring proxies. So the discussion about proxy objects is still in the future, but object pool can be combined with proxy design pattern also very successfully.